Hi, my name is Jerome Bradford. This is my music journal where we explore music album by album.
So let's just jump right into it.
Strong, solidified statistic.
Do a little introduction if you don't mind.
Absolutely. This is Nathan Swets, the music director of Mavradio. I'm joined with Jerome Bradford, man. It's great to be with you. This is all you, man. Talk about
Nice. Okay.
today. Tell us
Yeah.
about
Yeah, I'm excited to be working on something with Mavradio and for Nate. You kind of pushed me to get out there. So that's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. So and you guys can either use Jerome Bradford Sports, and I know it's a long name. So yeah,
match almost or have fun with it.
yeah, right. The whole hyphenated married name, right? Yeah.
Right on, right
All
on.
right. So let's just jump right into it if you don't mind, eh? So today we'll be talking about the album Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys and just how it changed them, their legacy, and what it meant to future generations and why it still resonates. For me, I take it back to my mom listening to the radio. My mom always put on the oldies station while she was cleaning. And I remember hearing Surfing USA, Help Me Ron, all those songs. And I was always interested in rock as a kid. And they were cool, You're like, oh, that's some cool guitar playing. But I remember reading about Pet Sounds before I heard it. And I was like, okay, I gotta see what the hubbub is about that. And you're immediately stricken by the cover art. The cover art is just this weird photo of the Beach Boys feeding zoo animals, and you're kind of like, okay, like, what is this? You get home and you open it up. Were you gonna say something?
I'm gonna jump in and just say, okay, you think of
Okay.
the Beach Boys, you think of the beach, right? So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
saw the cover for the first time, I'm looking like, okay, there's the Beach Boys feeding goats and
Yeah.
it's like they're very, very in a different world than the normalized.
Yeah.
The expectation was, not the typical like Beach Boys expectation, I guess. And that's just cover art alone. Hey,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's in my top 10 cover arts. And like you said, they very much were fun, beach, girls, surfing. And that's what they were. That's what their fans grew up with. And you get this album that is just you're hit by how sad it is. And automatically you're like, okay, this isn't gonna be about surf girls, fun, the beach. He got his heart broken. So you're just thrown back, and we're listening to that in a way out of context. So I try to put, as a music nerd, I try to put my head in a space of a Beach Boys fan. This is their 11th studio album. You're not expecting any of this, any of the sadness, the oversweeping themes, and you're blown apart. But for me, it was just awesome. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know Beach Boys to write lyrics like this.
Boy,
If
how
you had
about
a
sounds too? Some of the
yeah,
sounds on it is like very intricate. I when I think of the
mhm,
Beach Boys again, I think of just that Beach Boys sound, the harmonies
yeah,
between the guys and
yeah,
this, and it's like a beautiful sound. And tell you what, this album, at least from what I've heard, like it's got some of those beautiful sounds, but you can tell it takes you on a total ride, like
yeah,
totally different than some of their previous work.
yeah,
So sure you'll
yeah,
get information on why
yeah.
that is and the influence on that. That's crazy.
Yeah. And Nate, if you start to pick apart the sounds on the record, some of the things they played with were pop, jazz, exotica, classical, and avant-garde, which had never really been done with pop music in general. Because even though it's a very sad album, it's still a pop album. It's a big concept pop album.
Okay, and that's what they considered it to be, like, when they came out?
Yeah,
Was it
at the
was it
time, it was considered to be a big concept pop album. But
okay.
the interesting thing about that, it created kind of genres that wasn't there. It created, the roots in indie pop. Some people argue that it's the first emo album because it's so sad, and a lot of emo bands still pull from that album as an influence.
There were definitely some minor chords and minor tunes going on in there. At least
Mm.
even in some of oh goodness, let's see. I want to dive into this one.
Okay.
This song in particular, if I
Yeah.
can take us for a ride here, the song
Yeah, no, go ahead.
the song "Let's Go Away for a While." It's a
Mm.
complete instrumental song, and the album seemed like, again, it was kind of like a roller coaster, like it was
Mm.
changing in style. Because there's a couple songs that are like super happier and more melodic, but like "Let's Go Away for a While" was a total instrumental song that felt like an interlude, but it just kind of took me away. It like took me out of the equation because there wasn't any vocals, and it just kind of put me into an experience. And the variations within the instrumental alone was like just so unique. I mean, this is 1966, right? So like I'm like thinking in my head, I know the Beatles come around and they're doing their experimental things too in that generation, but for the Beach Boys, I've never heard something like that.
Yeah.
Like it was not the norm, right?
No, it was not. And I think especially for American rock wasn't American, I should say, pop rock wasn't that experimental at the time. You had London being much more experimental. Now, you did have like Kate Ashbury and those guys getting it, but you want to place your bet on the Beach Boys to be the first American band to get that experimental.
Yeah. Well, and again, like I guess in my brain, I would be thinking, okay, the experimental people that are trying these new sounds are not going to be the ones in the mainstream or the front
Yeah,
line.
exactly. Yeah.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
So and wow, like, what do you pull from? What do you like? What do you that shift? Did you like that shift? I mean, I know you weren't in that generation. You were saying that your mother would listen to it on the radio.
Yeah.
This album played on the radio?
Yeah, they play a staple hit from this album is Wouldn't It Be Nice?
Okay.
Yeah. And there that kind of takes that song opens the album, but it takes you on a journey too, because the whole album is about this couple pining about what it'll be like when they live away from their parents and kind of start their own life, And there's a correlation too, because at the time of this album, a lot of the Beach Boys fans had matured and they were kind of starting their own life, and music was changing around the Beach Boys also. Rock was getting a little more edgier, and you have to mention that the Beach Boys were the Americans' darling. If you told your parents I'm going to a Beach Boys concert, they would say, cool. Juxtapose that to saying, oh, I'm going to a Rolling Stones show or a Who show. Then your parents might be like,
a little more concerned,
Yeah. Yeah.
Compared to now, different story, but yeah, definitely. What about like thinking about just the title name in general? Wouldn't it be nice? Like, it sounds like it, like they're it's not a fantasy, but the song name just in general, like it's like who was the writer of this album again? You know this the main.
It's Brian Wilson, and he did have a second writer on there, Tony Asher. Brian Wilson and Tony Asher were responsible for most of the lyrics. So
yeah, I mean, off of just my immediate reaction to the song title, it's like it's something so simple. Wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah.
It's so simple of a title, but given the context, like the sounds that are within the album, like you're saying, you know, it's sadder and things like this. It's almost like the guys are sitting back and being like, wouldn't it be nice? Almost like a not a nostalgic feel, but almost like a reminiscent feel.
Yeah.
Like when, and that some of that can bring sadness, right?
Yeah, it does. I always, you know, for me, it brings up a sense of longing, you know, like waiting for a life to start when you're at that age. And I think anyone can relate that. If you take out the context of a high school romance, you know, maybe you've liked someone that hasn't liked you and you have that, wouldn't it be nice? It's such a simple title, but there's so many contexts and situations you can apply that to.
And it's the first one on the album. Just
yeah, and it kind of lets you know that you're going on a journey. Friends with Brian Wilson have said that he wanted this album to be like an art show. Like all of these songs stand alone, but they can tell an overreaching story. And I did a little bit of research too. The heart of the album he wanted to be the concept of losing that innocence when you grow up, losing that childhood innocence. And I think the song that really reflects that is Hang On to Your Ego. Just the way the music is played and the way the instruments meld with the vocals. And it's almost kind of even a sad chorus where it's like, hang on to your ego. I know you're gonna lose it. It's just sad. Yeah.
Right on. Yeah, I
Yeah.
would, man. I definitely am right there next to you, thinking that it stands alone. I tell you what, I was listening to it in the shower a little bit too, you know?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, what's gonna transpire here?
Yeah. 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 It did. And that, you know, it forever changed the Beach Boys in so many ways. It opened them up to a lot of music critics, and at the time it wasn't really received well. It was panned. The Beach Boys fans didn't get it. Critics, it was just too much at that time for them.
We should dive into that.
Yeah.
Why do you, of course, I mean, we can state the obvious of like, okay, it was not the norm and experimental music was not on the forefront of mainstream music. Like, but what's your take on it?
My take on it, one take I have on it that's kind of a first thing. Like we said, this was the let's just say this was America's favorite band. This was Clean Cut, this was that. And they were very popular band at the time. They were in pop. And I just don't think that audience was ready to take that ride with them. I don't think they were ready to hear this, especially coming from the Beach Boys. I think if this had been a band like maybe Unknown or coming from a different place like Britain, it would have been well received. But to the strength of the Beach Boys, I think what makes it so powerful is that you couldn't have had this from any other band. Because as different as it is to me, it still has a lot of the Beach Boys templates just built on and expand upon, like that tightness of the instruments. You know, Brian Wilson always wrote songs about girls, but they were more in a fun way or a help me run away. This was I'm in love with this girl, but I'm gonna lose her. This huge existential love crisis.
And that translated right into the music in the album with emotion and feeling, right?
Yeah. You have any thoughts on it? I mean, like I said, I know you're kind of new to the album, but
I am pretty new to the album, but I can tell you what is I haven't listened to every single Beach Boys album song by song by song, but I think the general that brings a good perspective from my part as not being an expert on
yeah,
the Beach Boys. It's like the general consensus of people, like the general
yeah,
public know who the Beach Boys are. They're one of those household names in the music industry in the world, like in the early 60s.
yeah,
They shape. I mean, it's the Beach Boys. You think of the beach, you think of the good,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
like the very
yeah.
beginnings of feel good music. It's like, wow.
Mm,
But I could tell you what, even not listening to all 10 albums before, I was not expecting to sound like I did.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I know more about the Beatles, and they're in the
Mm,
60s too, and I don't know if people like to compare the two or not.
yeah.
I'm gonna stay away
Well,
from the comparativeness.
there was always a comparison because people will always argue what is the greatest concept album, this Pet Sounds album or Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Heart Club?
Right. And
Yeah,
Sergeant Pepper is kind of like that that turn of the wheel that
yeah,
reminds me. And I'm like, how did I not even know of Pet Sounds, an
mm,
album that is super experimental in
yeah, yeah,
1966?
yeah, yeah,
So when you're talking about how it's influenced, everything, I'm like, yeah, I see that because again, they're on the forefront, and this is
mm,
1966, and I personally haven't heard it before. I heard of the Beatles album like Sergeant Pepper. Everyone knows that's
mm,
been, was revolutionary,
yeah,
but this would have just as well as being,
mm,
because they are one of those guys, one of those groups that were right on the front, and
mm,
a totally different sound. And by the way, the
mm.
Beatles and the Beach Boys are not the same. The Beach Boys
No,
have it in their own way, like
yeah,
a very. I can tell this album's experimental.
mm,
Even you can tell it's experimental because even the equipment they were used back then, they had to be experimental with the equipment.
yeah, yeah,
I'm sure. Um,
yeah. I think what some things that I found interesting about this, um, they actually use beverage cans, and this is the first rock album to include a bicycle horn. So I'm like, yeah, they got real experimental, you know.
Do you know what song that's on and why or
No, I
how?
don't. I was trying to find it too, like, but I couldn't. I don't know why. I really wish I could have found it.
But somewhere,
Somewhere there's
somewhere
beverage cans and a bicycle horn buried in there.
that they sampled and actually used and it
Yeah,
made the
yeah,
final cut.
yeah,
That goes to show it's a true experimental
yeah.
piece of
It's
artwork,
kind,
right?
yeah. Phil Spector's Wall of Sound was kind of a influence on this album, although it was really used in an experimental way. The Wall of Sound includes recording double takes or even triple takes to get this layered sound, whereas just this orchestra type of, hence Wall of Sound.
Mm,
Mhm.
right on. That's very interesting. I have
Yeah,
zero clue about that. Zero
yeah,
clue.
yeah. It
Um,
was.
I'd like to take a step back and because again, I didn't know of this album and listening to it, I wouldn't have known that they would have played it on the radio. But going back
Mm,
to people's like responses to it, we've already dug up a little bit about it, but
yeah.
Wouldn't It Be Nice was a radio piece. So
Mm,
right when the album came out, we pointed out that it wasn't received necessarily as well as
mm,
maybe it could have, which I mean, can you blame the culture? I'm not sure, as
yeah,
experimental as it was,
yeah,
but in the end result was for the better, right?
yeah.
It was. What do you know if there's a timeline, like if it was a year after or 2 years after? Did they tour this
Um,
album? Did they, like when was it received well and
I
people
think
kind of
it was
understood it?
received. I think it was received well. like 2 to 3 years. But where it really comes into its heart is future generations. Um, One of the biggest examples, and we kind of touched on this earlier, where I see it is emo. A lot of the deep sadness resonated with a lot of emo bands. The big correlation I kind of see is the band Weezer. Weezer had the Blue album, which was very light, poppy. They came in after Nirvana, and rock was in this place where it needed something fun because you had the whole grunge and the alternative seriousness. Well, their follow-up, Pinkerton, kind of mirrored the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, and that was very sad, very experimental. When Weezer sent when Weezer sent Pinkerton to their label, the label was in a tizzy. They were like, "How are we gonna sell this? This is not fun." You have an acoustic song. There's even a song on Pinkerton called "Tired of Sex," which is just him going through these lists of girls and how he's just tired. I'm tired of dating. I'm in just an emotionally broke place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So it's a
Yeah.
totally different.
Yeah.
When was that album around, Weezer? I'm not into
Pinkerton had to be around the 90s. Let me see.
rock. Yeah, Weezer and Nirvana.
Yeah.
That's interesting to hear about that.
Yeah.
Dive into
And
it.
there's some similarities between Rivers Cuomo's, the lead singer, Weezer, and Brian Wilson. After he recorded Pinkerton, he did not want to play that album. Those songs were really hard for him to perform. When he came to receive praise for the album, he didn't like it. Kind of made him insecure because the album Pinkerton was so emotionally raw. Well, Brian Wilson went through that. He had people a couple years after come and say, "Oh, I love Pet Sounds. This is awesome." But friends around him said it was often a sour core because he didn't like that people didn't get it. His friends often said that Brian Wilson appreciated the comments, but the comments reminded him about the fact that mainstream pop rock didn't get this huge conceptual album.
It's like the delay of embracing the action, like the true nature of the art, I guess. That's a way to put it. And again, this is a totally different time now. Something like that today, there's now that's a whole nother conversation to have. Experimental music is flying all over the place now.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't even have to have those influences by a label now. You can literally be independent if you want, and if you can afford it and do it, and you can make any sound you want in the world. Back in the day, it's 1966. You're talking about the big labels, right? Let's see who it was. Capitol Records that released and had the rights or whatever it was that's behind this Pet Sounds album. I mean, imagine bringing this. Imagine bringing it to the guys in suits and being like, "Hey, here's this album, release it." This is what we bring. And all they're used to is that household name of the Beach Boys,
Boys, and it's sad to say, but especially at the time, because this is the time before indie labels like Matador, SST, or Sub Pop, where they needed to make money, but they understood, let the artists do what they want. They'll create something in their own way. There was, at that time, there was no telling Capitol like, "Hey, we're America's favorite band. We're gonna do something really experimental here. You're gonna give a suit and tie guy a heart attack on the spot." Like, what? No.
Well, it's almost, a metaphor would be like who's not that they were the culture, but music can be a part of the culture, and it is for sure,
Yeah,
right? And it can have an influence on the culture, and it's like, okay, who's driving the car, who's going for, who's and then who's in the backseat going for a ride. Well,
yeah,
usually
yeah,
you would submit your album to the guys in suits, which would be the
yeah,
regulators to what's going out to the public, what's going to have the influence, what's going to be the reception, and
yeah,
go through that. And instead, it's almost like with Pet Sounds, for example, it'd be, okay, hey guys, you're going to be riding, because
yeah,
you're going on this experimental train, so hop in and ride.
yeah,
And I wonder what those conversations had to be like at
yeah.
the Capitol Records
Uh,
building. And I'm like, it wouldn't surprise me if there had been arguments going about like, hey, like we're set on this, or if they
yeah,
were all on board, that's absolutely amazing.
yeah,
If everyone's on the same page, like, hey,
yeah,
let's all go for a ride. Let's see where this
yeah.
culture goes. Or, let's see what the reception is. Of course, it wasn't immediately, but ultimate, like, what do you think? Of course, in the end, it's probably worth it, right? But like the
Yeah.
immediate reception is important for the guys in suits,
Mm,
and even for the bandmates, like the guy
mm,
that's writing these songs. If the
mm.
reception wasn't well, it even impacted him. So it's like that fine line of like that confidence.
Yeah.
I'm like, what do you take on that?
For me, and I admit mine is a bit skewed to one side because I write, I do stuff. I think you ultimately have to let the artist do what they want. If you put an artist into a box or don't let them do it the way they want, you're just gonna, I put it like this, it's gonna be like being trapped in a miserable marriage because no one is gonna be happy in that relationship. I'm often reminded of this story. Frank Ocean got signed to a major label, and one of his friends helped him get signed, who is a rapper, and they expected him to put out an album every 2 years. Well, he doesn't operate like that. It'll be 6, 7 years before Frank's Ocean decides to record something. He does it when he feels it's right. And his friend said that me getting him a major deal hurt our friendship. I didn't take the time to step back and realize that, okay, he doesn't record like this. Music is experimental to him. He only records when he wants to say something. He may spend 4 months on one song. That's very much against how corporate the corporate structure wants you to produce an album. You tell them I'm not recording another album for 6 years, maybe 7. Again, they're having a heart attack. They're like, we've dumped all this money into you, like,
Yeah,
boom,
foundations
boom,
that are
boom.
bringing.
Yeah. I kind of call it, I've dubbed and call it the Disney effect, because Disney, when they buy something out, they constantly want it milked and produced no matter what. With movies and shows, they bought up a lot of Marvel and the Star Wars, and they're like, more, more, more. Well, some musicians just don't work like that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a whole like,
Yeah,
it's just the simple appreciation of understanding that every single artist, it's a work of art, by the way. We're talking about music,
yeah,
and only a certain percentage of musicians succeed. A very small percentage succeed to be able to even do it for their career, and then only a certain percentage of those successful artists actually do it for the have continual success.
yeah,
And with that come with the process of creating that art. Every single person in an individual or group or whatever has their own way of doing it. Like Tame Impala, for example, he'll make an album every 5, it takes him 5-6 years.
Yeah.
He's like a perfectionist, and he's like,
Yeah.
I get the best of myself, but
Yeah.
that's just the way I do it. I know
Yeah.
people that can make 10 beats for hip
Yeah.
hop music in
Yeah.
a day.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the different art forms,
Yeah.
and thinking about the corporations, of course, they don't
Yeah.
depending on who it is.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna throw allegations, but
Yeah.
depending on the corporation, they may not understand the true art
Yeah.
form because they're
Yeah.
not the ones doing the true art form. They're
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
contractors, and
Yeah.
there's a time and place for those people.
Yeah, there definitely is. There is a time and place. If you look at, I would say, if you look at objectively, these people, a lot of those people don't come in because of the love of music. They come in because business structure, or they like, the revenue, or they, like the sale of the musician or the product. So their mindset is gonna be very different from an artist. You
Absolutely.
know,
One's focusing on the business side, and
yeah,
people have to do the business side,
yeah.
Um,
You
and
kind of
and
touched on this before, but we're talking about pet sounds. If you put yourself in the mind of a music producer, he's thinking you're America's favorite rock band, well received by parents. Why would you want to blow that up? Brian Wilson is thinking, I've been through some tough times. I need to get some stuff out. His mental health, he was going through some things. So you have those two opposite mindsets that are conflicting.
mhm. Yeah, and then you have to put it, well, and like it's not like you could just make an album if you wanted to get the sound out. You can just
Yeah.
make it. Well, what do you make? You make it and then throw it away, like,
Mhm.
it's like
Yeah.
it's their 11th studio album. They
Yeah.
know the process of making a record. Like that's what they did. If they changed it up, then goodness, man. I mean, that's what they
Yeah.
had to do. That's what
Yeah.
happened, right? Um, Very
And
interesting. Um,
yeah. Yeah.
but let's talk about again, we've talked about the radio portion of it, but is there something that's thrown, caught your attention throughout this conversation that's like, let's dive deeper into?
Uh, well, just how it kind of affected the world outside of rock. Questlove, who's a hip hop producer, he loves that album and just how it touched different genres. He often tells a story, but at the time, in the 90s, being a hip hop producer, it was seen as kind of weird to like indie music. So he was telling a story of how Jay Dilla came to him after a show one night, was like, okay, you uh you guys are on to something. And it was just like, that's all he said, and just walked away. So I mean, it's even touched other genres besides rock. And I think that's why the album will still resonates today. I think the album will always resonate with each generation, or at least some people in that generation.
To some degree, especially, right?
Yeah.
I've listened to alternative music. I
Yeah.
enjoy indie pop, indie rock,
Mm.
things like that.
Yeah.
So I would listen to that, and I also went through a phase where I listened to a lot of the Beatles, and
Yeah.
like I heard their experimental sounds.
Mm.
But in this generation, let's stick with this generation with
Yeah.
the alternative and indie pop and rock.
Mm.
When I listen to that, it's like, okay, this is something different. It's experimental now. It's very interesting. But what I lack to understand was where some of those motivations may have came from, like where those ideas may have been originated, where they could have been pulled. And the second I turned on Pet Sounds, I realized like there's a heavy influence here that people even in the generations now could definitely pull from it in making songs if I did in the first couple seconds. I linked the two together like this is 1966, but these are revolutionary sounds.
Yeah, definitely. You have a lot of people pulling from that wider sound and they go back to it like Brian Wilson. You know, one thing that's not really kind of talked about with this album gave the rise to the producer, which you really can do in the studio when you start experimenting with different sounds. You know, I always say there's a little bit of Brian Wilson and Kanye West. If you ever have listened to any interview about Kanye's West producing abilities, he is very much on the ball. He will work 10, 12 hours just to get that obscure sample. You know, and Brian Wilson was very much that way. He may have not been getting samples in the hip hop sense, but he will work for hours just to make that bell sound right or that drum sound right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's part of the perfection. Or well, would you describe it as a perfectionist trait? And so
I would describe it as a perfectionist trait. I don't think it's bad though. I don't think it's a bad perfectionist trait. That's one of the things I adored about Brian Wilson, Kanye, that they're willing to work hours to get that perfect sound or that obscure sample, you know. So
well, it's inside their brain and they want to let it out. I know, or I could absolutely relate to that. Hearing a sound inside of your brain and being like, I want this to come out. And let's say you're working with someone and you just want the sound to come out. And you try and you work on it, and it's like, dude, it's the other person might say, hey, it's like 2 seconds long. Like it sounds good. And you're like, no, like having that dedication, like I have it inside of my brain. I just want to get it out. Being able to like actually work so long where again, here's the thing is the general audience may never notice the difference between the song or the sound that you had before and the sound that you wanted out of your brain. But it's those like these smallest differences that make a big difference, right? I mean, because it's those characters.
Oh yeah, the smallest difference, you know, and sometimes you're surprised by that smaller difference. You know, this is a different genre, but just recently I found out that there is a Powerpuff Girls sample buried in a Kendrick Lamar song. And when I found that out, I was like, that's where that from. And it's like, yeah, that's wild, but it works.
Yeah, right.
It's
pulling the different motivations or you know, or the different influences. I would have never imagined Kendrick Lamar, you said. I would never imagine him having an influence from from that.
I love that stuff. I love that stuff.
So I want to bring up the sounds of Pet Sounds. I know we're bouncing all around, and that's okay because it's all contributing to that conversation, right? And it comes full circle. I think what's cool is listening to the album. We're talking about sounds and how the sounds are so experimental. Again, it's 1966. Put it in your head. This is 1966. New sounds are coming out. People are receiving it weird. They don't know what to think about it. How could we explain to the audience what these sounds are like without playing them the song? So, like, for example, I'll throw an example out there. The first song, it starts happy. It was melodic. It has the harmonies of the Beach Boys at first. You know, the guys come together and singing. That's the sound, the Beach Boys sound. But then it switched into various different parts. I don't know how to like really pinpoint it, but it changes
Yeah.
throughout the song. And it almost sounded like it brought to me a feeling of like, it made me think of different times of life.
Yeah.
And it's all through sound. So
Yeah.
can you explain what some of the sounds are like and how, a
Oh
deeper
man.
meaning to it?
Yeah. So the song I always go to is Hang On to Your Ego. And it starts off as this just very uplifting, bright song. And you're like, always explaining a scene like this. You're in school, you see your best friend either asking this girl out or dating this girl, and you just know it's not gonna end in the best place or the happiest places. And I say that song is equivalent to that because the music is just upbeat at first. Hang on to your ego. Then it starts to get more downtrodden, like it goes to hang on to your ego, but I know you're gonna lose it. And the music just gets more downtrodden about it. And you're sitting back, you're like, this this guy is gonna get his heart broke. And the music really takes you on that journey. You're rooting. And I often say that song off that album kind of sums up what the album is about. You try to hold on to a certain amount of innocence that idle teenage, but you grow up and like you view things different. And that song, just the way it's played and the way the music rises and falls, just it takes you on that journey.
What kind of time frame do you think that could be? And when you're talking about the high school example, and you're seeing your friend, and you don't know if it's going to go well, because okay, let's dig deep into this, because
Okay.
like high school, for example, is way different than it was back in
Yeah.
the 90s.
Yeah.
It's different
Yeah.
than it was back in the 80s, and
Yeah.
let alone the 60s.
Yeah.
So like what kind of time frame do you see that being, and what kind of like person or people would really resemble into that, like
Um, for me, it's not necessarily a time frame, even though every generation is different. It has its own problems. I think at the cups of that is two people that really love each other, but they just can't make it work. And it's sung from the guy's part because he's the one that's losing his love. So you could say it's the guy trying to make stuff work and it's not gonna work. Something happens and they just don't see each other in that light anymore. If I had to sum up that high school sweetheart couple breaking up once they graduate high school, once they get into the real world and things happen, their attitudes and emotions change about each other. Whether it
so
be, go ahead.
no, continue that real quick, finish the
Yeah.
thought.
Whether it be they're going to different schools, maybe they want different things in life. Maybe the guy wants a family with this girl, and maybe the girl doesn't want kids. Maybe she wants to go do something else, and then that whole image of her like, well, okay, she doesn't want what I want. So, I was banking on this.
Do you think it brings a sense of hopelessness is not the word, because I did hear some hope in some of the songs, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
some parts where it's like it's not completely over, I'm not dug in the ground with dirt
Yeah.
over your head,
Yeah.
like it's not over. What's another, do you think what kind of feelings do we...
what I get from that song besides sadness is kind of acceptance too. Like, this didn't go my way, but like you said, I'm not in the dirt.
Mhm.
And acceptance of a loss of innocence.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, everything you explained right before that, I think really does. It does kind of put the sounds into perspective, into actual life events, you know, you're
Yeah.
talking about
Mhm.
the examples there. And I think we're getting closer to digging up some of the feelings that
Right.
because
Yeah.
again,
And not
you can't play the album. If you're wondering what these sounds are like, go listen to the album.
yeah. Please go listen to this album. And
Listen
I
to the
should
album.
make it seem that like it's known as a sad album and it is a sad album, but there's also some acceptance. I often say, the good transition you get from this when I relate, when you're a kid, yeah, fun, surf, beach, but as an adult, it can't always be that. And you're gonna not necessarily that you're walking around sad all the time as an adult, because no one wants to do that or humdrum unless you're Morrissey. Morrissey makes it look really cool, but that's a whole nother story for a next episode. But you accept that you will have some losses in your life. And so for me, the record I see as a good transition, even though they didn't get it at the time for Beach Boys fans. You can't be fun surf all your adult life. Like you're gonna have losses, you're gonna lose parents, friends, lovers, You can't surf 7 days a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. Keep. I mean, we're so. I would say, again, if you were trying to dig up the feelings of the sounds, you just kind of have to listen to the music. And I would
Yeah.
say this. Let me say, it. It's like, okay, well, I don't listen to experimental music, or I don't listen to old music, old whatever, right?
Yeah.
But
Right.
it's I think a great reason to take a moment and listen to works of art like this is just taking a moment to respect and appreciate the songs and sounds and art and people that came before us.
Yeah.
That laid out the stepping stones
Yeah.
for influential music now, like experimental, indie pop, indie rock. I could link these directly to songs now that are like, whoa,
Yeah.
I could link that piece of
Yeah.
cake now.
Yeah.
So,
As I said, like I would link that to the rise of the producer and what you can do in the studio. I've often said there's a correlation between Brian Wilson, Kanye West, two different people, two different backgrounds, but you can see that correlation in the way they produce, the way, how serious they are and how they each view their music.
Well, and take the fact that it's 1966, totally different technology. Everything's digital.
Yeah.
Completely. I mean, this is the span of 60 years almost that we're talking, 50 plus years we're talking about now. So dig up on that a little bit.
Oh man, just well, I think like we said, just the equipment now is so much more advanced, and now, I would say the biggest difference between now and there, just even if you take out like anything can be sampled now, we've touched on a little bit with the Powerpuff Girls, like there are some samples that I've heard, I'm like, what, and then the technology just to stretch it out or loop it so much that you won't even recognize it.
Yeah, you can distort things. And here's the thing, by the way, is that's a lot of this stuff is up in the air when it comes to copyright and music sampling. Because the span back then, back in the 40s, if you were the Beach Boys in 1966 and you wanted to sample a song, or even if you wanted to edit your own, like sample your own sound, you know what you had to do? You had to take the tape that she recorded on, by the way, and you would have to literally cut it and splice it and hope that it lines up right. And you would have to tape it together and then run it through. This was no easy process. If you screwed it up, It's
No, it wasn't,
not
you know.
good. So
Yeah.
so
And
take,
you know, there's something to be said to that, you know, that I feel like there's two things too that happen. There's something to be said for the Beach Boys. You know, they were on a big label, like, so that gave them a little more leeway for it. You know, I'm sure if they were getting into some trouble, that, you know, the label was like, okay, we'll cut that check. Now, you know, that's gonna be very different than a independent artist trying to get a sample that's not cleared, or that could come back to haunt them.
well, and now, but again, nowadays things are so digitalized, and we have copyright use that's evolutionized since then too. So the term,
Yeah,
you
you
think,
know.
okay, what comes to mind when you think of fair use? What do you think? You know,
Oh man,
what's your depiction on it? You know?
my determination of fair use. Oh, see, there's so many because I'm split. I mean, to me, fair use is take it, but play with it so it just doesn't sound like that. But if you're trying to pay homage, I get why once in a blue, maybe you're like, okay, I didn't want to change that. But see, then that's where we get in that
Mhm.
tricky territory. You know, you may be trying to pay homage, but that artist may take offense to it, you know?
Right. A lot of it's up
So,
in the air, man.
yeah, you know,
And by the way, there's so many songs
yeah,
that can be just thrown into the world now
yeah,
because of the technology. You can just throw it all in
yeah.
the air and throw it in.
And
So,
and I feel bad, Nate, for this because I feel like I'm bouncing all around with different genres, but I'm gonna date myself here a little bit. You know, when Beastie Boys recorded, was it? I believe it was Paul's Boutique or License to Ill. Don't misquote me, but one of those albums
mhm.
had a horrendous amount of samples. It was like an ungodly amount. Well, at the time, you know, not sampling wasn't being paid that much attention paid to in hip hop. Well, you know, you can look up, historians will say that album could never be produced today because after that album came out, you know, you had some critics doing some math. They they would have been sued into oblivion if they
They
had
did
had
go.
the huh?
They did go to court for that album.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm
It's
not
like,
sure if they won or not, by the way.
yeah,
I can't recall
yeah.
if they won or
And
not.
I feel like that album changed sampling the way that like people were that weren't looking at sampling were like, okay, let me make sure I'm not being sampled because the BC Boys got really huge and that story followed them with their rise to fame. So a lot of companies, producers were like, okay, we're being sampled by hip hop artists. We have to watch that closely now. So
Mhm. Let's
as we
tie
said,
this. Sorry.
no, you go ahead. Sorry.
I'm going to take a total left turn here and take this for a ride. You said earlier that the Beach Boys weren't necessarily, you know, the mainstream listened to by hip hop artists back in the day.
Yeah.
But again, back when the boom of vinyl and sampling was happening in the 90s, do you recall any hip hop artists using any samples from Pet Sounds at all?
Oh, you know, not offhand, I don't, because I always liked hip hop, but I was a little more into the weirder hip hop and whatnot, and so I don't. But that's something I should look up and maybe post to the site just so people know.
Yeah, if they did
Yeah.
do that, we could throw it in the description or something, you know, like,
Right.
hey,
Yeah.
by the way, Pet Sounds snuck its way
Yeah.
into the hip hop world. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I remember. I remember stories of rappers being influenced. You know. So, and as I said before, Questlove was often like ridiculed by other rappers. They were like, "You guys are nerds for listening to the Beach Boys." So, you know, it wasn't. it wasn't always easy to be a hip hop artist and be into like weird or obscure rock. I feel like that's generally something new because I feel in today's world we have many artists that cross different genres,
Oh yeah.
but in the past that wasn't the case. I'm sorry, I'm gonna go completely left here.
No, take a
So
right.
sorry, we're taking so many lefts.
I took us
De
on
La
the left. You
Soul,
take us on the right here.
right?
Let's go both ways.
De La Soul, yeah, De La Soul were often seen as like the weird black kids in hip hop because they listened to rock, punk, folk, and just they had a tough time.
Absolutely. And it's the culture together is like kind of mended or has come together a bit now. I don't know if it's a stigma back then or different groups or what in the world it was back then. But for example, do you know who Thundercat is?
Yeah.
So there's a thing called Yacht Rock, and that's something I listen to. I've got a radio show and we explore the genre. I'm not gonna throw it all around, but it's very fun and it's a subgenre of music. And for example, here Thundercat comes around, this amazing, profound bassist now, and he wears like very intricate. He's in fashion now, and this is 2021, by the way. And he's kind of in different cultures, kind of like tied with some of the rap or hip hop culture, but he's also tied with indie culture. You think of like Mac DeMarco, things
he
like
also
that.
played, not to interrupt you, he also played in some hardcore bands too.
So he has. Okay, so he's been there too. And by the way, he's also made a song with Michael McDonald and Kenny Loggins, who are the absolute founders of Yacht Rock. So
oh my God, I have not heard it. That just blew my mind.
He's made songs with different cultures and different genres all across the board with his bass guitar, man. It's crazy. So,
yes. And his videos are hilarious too, man. If you ever get the chance, check out his videos. They're hilarious.
Very different kind of, particular individual. But again, could that have been the case if it weren't for people like back in the day having to revolutionize music? So
definitely, all these artists, they help push it, like I think and you mentioned Thundercat, I mentioned with Kanye West. I think there's an affiliation for the Brian Wilsons and people like that listen to the experimental in hip hop, that they found influence, idols, inspiration, whatever you want to say in that. So, it does open your mind. I remember as a kid, Pet Sounds even had influence on me as a writer in poetry, Same with some of that experimental rock, whether it be indie punk or just some progressive rock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a great album. And as a guy that, again, is not an expert at the Beach Boys sound, I think the general public, it brings that perspective, but the general public has that perception or point of view for the Beach Boys, like, hey, those were the guys, the household name. Different kind of term with this album. And I thank you for bringing it to my attention and hopefully to other people's too, man. Because it's even Paul McCartney said,
no problem.
Even Paul McCartney said that the song "God Only Knows," he thinks that's one of the best songs ever made. So obviously, this album has left a tremendous mark on the world.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about it and hearing your thoughts on it too, as well. So.
Yeah, that was a great ride. Are there any like last thoughts or anything else you want to bring up about the album?
Oh man,
Give it its, bread
Yeah,
and butter, right?
I actually do want to bring up a thought, and this is, I'm gonna get into a little sentimental stuff here. It includes pet sounds, but I think this is a good way to close it out and just the power of the album. There's a comic strip called Doonesbury, and in it they were doing um a story arc about AIDS. And one of the characters in there, and I wrote the name down. I think I'm gonna slaughter his name, but Andy Lippincott ends up succumbing to AIDS. And one of the last panels is him drifting off, listening to uh, Wouldn't It Be Nice? And on his notebook is sprawled, Brian Wilson is God. And that has been uh, awarded several times for being the best panel in that comic strip in this whole long running time. And that helped to kind of humanize people that have AIDS to readers, and I think that speaks to even though it's not musical, it speaks to the power of that, for that creator to pull something from that and put into a last panel. So the album has even touched stuff outside of music.
Great information, man.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
On.
Yeah.
Well, good conversation. Great
Good
conversation.
conversation. We'll have to do these again.
Absolutely. We'll
Yeah.
be back. This was, what do you call this? What is the conversation?
Oh, man.
Episode 1. Good time conversation with Jerome. And
yeah, episode 1. We'll work on the title, but we definitely will be coming back with more of these. Definitely.
We'll more conversations to come.
Yeah.
More albums to come. Maybe I'll choose an album.
Maybe
We'll
more
see.
different topics,
Yeah. So
yeah, different things. I would love for you to suggest an album for me, since I am on this Beach Boys kick. I definitely would love to deep dive at one time. And still very much to this day, Beach Boys and Black Flag represented the two different sides of California, but couldn't be further apart in musical content and musical sound. We've talked enough about the Beach Boys that people know what they are. Black Flag is this 80s hardcore band that's, it's not all fun. It's not all surf. I work at a factory. My dad's work at a factory. This isn't fun. So
all right. Well,
yeah.
Look out for what's to come. We'll come back with another episode and highlights for you. So Jerome, say see you later to them.
Take care, Mav listeners. Go check out Pet Sounds, and hey, go check out some of those Beatles experimental albums too.
All right. Good episode.
Yeah.
See you later.
Yeah, take care.